Alright, finally, let's talk about OOP or Object Oriented Programming. We shall keep it simple. We are going to talk about one thing. What is OOP? The usual definition that you can find on the web goes something like this. Take a second to read this. I'm not sure about you guys, but I do not find this useful. Imagine if someone were to come in with little idea about programming and you give them this. So what do we say? Thanks, but no thanks. The next definition that is fairly common is the car definition. So take a second to read this. When I first started out learning programming, I had this car definition fed to me and I didn't really like it. I sort of can understand what they're trying to say, but I can't visualize the code. I can't visualize what is OOP per se, and I can't understand why do we need OOP. And how do we code OOP? Like, I get more questions than answers. Part 2 of the car definition. Take a second. Yep, I don't like it. Okay, here is our definition in simple English. Take a second to read this. Better? So OOP revolves around using a special variable called objects. Alright, so from now on, I'm going to talk about objects. Forget about OOP and its definition. Think objects. Think of this special variable. It can do two things. It can store multiple values. It can do stuff and return values like a function. So think of multiple values as multiple variables. So the object can have multiple variables and it can have multiple functions in it. Alright, it will be clearer in the next few slides. Let's talk about multiple values or multiple variables. We have seen this before, price data table. And notice that we use .high and .low. So price data table is an object. It has more than two variables, but in this case we show two variables, high and low. So it stores multiple values, high and low. Another example, this fictional object, Lucas special object, stores the variable current net profit. So I guess right now what you're thinking is, how do I know when a variable is an object and when is a variable a normal variable, like an integer type, double type? That will depend on how we create it, how we declare it, or how we instantiate it. So we'll talk about that later. For now, just accept that these three are objects. And objects can also be an array. Like normal variables, you can assign the object variable to your irregular variable, or you can assign a regular variable or a regular value to an object variable. So objects can store multiple variables, and these are going to be termed object variables from now on. So open is object variable, close is an object variable. Current net profit is an object variable that belongs only to this object, Lucas special object. High and low are object variables that belong to this object, price data table. Now let's talk about the functions side of things. So objects can store multiple functions. Recognize this? Our trading control panel, that is an object. And it stores functions such as object, position open, position close, and result return code. These three are object functions and they belong to this object, my trading control panel. We are going to term them object functions from now on, so do take note. A good way to visualize it. Burn this image in your head. One more thing to note, the objects mentioned here are not graphical objects. So in the future, you will learn about graphical objects. You can create objects like arrows, lines, and so on and so forth, and put them on a chart. These are graphical objects. It has zero relation to the objects in OOP. Before we go, I want to talk about something. So in other programming language, they may not call it object variable. They may call it attributes, fields, class variable even. So ignore that. In MQL5, we are going to call it object variables. Same for the object functions. In other languages, they may call it object methods, but we are going to stick to the term object functions.